Listen up, beautiful nerds. In 1848, a family in New York City started hearing strange noises in their house, knocking and footsteps, and strange noises that seemed to travel from one side of the house to another. They searched everywhere, every nook of the house, and they couldn't figure out where the noises were coming from. And then the noises started answering questions. Neighbors came to investigate. Hundreds of people reportedly crowded the house, and eventually they were convinced that they were communicating with the spirit of a man who had been murdered and buried underneath the family cellar, and they even started digging for the body. This episode isn't meant to make fun of spiritualism or anyone's belief. We're just going over what the sources say. So in March of 1848, John and Margaret Fox lived in a small house in Hydesville, New York with their daughters Kate and Maggie. And one night, stay with me, they randomly started hearing rapping sounds. Margaret Fox later describes hearing the sounds in the east bedroom. Sometimes they've seemed to come from the floor. Other times it sounded like the furniture was being moved in the room, but they would go and check and everything was exactly where it was. Nothing had been moved. I would have been out of there. Then one night the noises were being heard in a different part of the house. Margaret said that they heard what sounded like footsteps in the pantry, the footsteps walking down the stairs, and nobody could sleep. Margaret began wondering if the house was haunted because even though she had never experienced anything like this herself, she has heard the stories about restless spirits. Her daughter Kate, however, had a considerably less supernatural theory because the next day was April Fool's Day, and Kate apparently told her mother, "Oh mother, I know what it is. Tomorrow is April Fool's and someone is trying to fool us." But the next day things got even stranger because Kate made a sound and waited, and the house responded. She tried again and it happened again. Now Margaret joined in too, and they asked, "Are you human?" No answer. "Are you spirit?" Rap sounds. And this is where the story goes completely off the rails because they didn't just stop at, "Oh, the house is haunted, there's a ghost here, let's get out of here." No, they started engaging with the ghost and asking questions. And throughout a series of knocks, they believed they were learning who the spirit was. Allegedly, according to the answers they were getting, the spirit was a man around 31 years old who had been murdered 5 years earlier on a random Tuesday night around midnight, and he was sleeping and his throat was supposedly cut, that is so savage, with a butcher knife. And they believed he was murdered for money. His body was then taken to the ground. So somehow the Fox family had gone from "what the hell is making that noise" to now there is a murdered man underneath the house through knocking. And how? Now the neighbors were getting involved too. One of the first neighbors called over was Miss Rungield. I'm sorry. And when she arrived, she reportedly found Maggie and Kate sitting in bed, clinging to each other, pale, trembling, and nearly speechless with fear. When she went, she apparently came over expecting to laugh at the whole thing, but then after seeing how scared the girls were, she started thinking that maybe something was actually happening. And she wasn't the only one. When he first heard about it, the strange noises, he also laughed. I mean, he ridiculed the idea that there was anything paranormal going on and that there had to be a normal explanation. So around 9 p.m. one night, he went over to investigate. Everybody's investigating. And when he got there, there was already 12 to 14 people there also investigating. Some were so scared that they didn't enter the room. William was like, "I got this." He sat on the bed and then he heard it himself. The rapping So he started asking the questions. William turned the Fox house into a paranormal homicide investigation, my friends. He questioned the spirit. Was the man murdered for money? Rap. Was his throat cut? Rap, rap. Was he asleep while he was attacked? Rap. Did he struggle? Rap. And according to William, the answers remained consistent. And eventually the investigation moved to the cellar. They all went down with the candles. And they were all standing in different places around the room. Then William would ask, is the body buried here? Nothing. Is it buried here? Nothing. Until he moved and reached a particular spot at the center of the cellar. Rap, rap. He moved away. Nothing. He came back. Rap. So, according to William, they repeated this test a few times. Same spot, same response every single time. So they started digging until they hit the water. And at this point, word about this mysterious phenomenon in the Fox house was spreading everywhere. And according to Margaret's account, at what point 300 people showed up at her house. Nerds, 300 people. That's crazy. Imagine 300 people in your house. But here's where it gets even weirder. Because at this point, you might have a theory. You're like, there's 2 children in the house, Maggie and Kate. So maybe you're thinking that the girls are doing it. But then people started giving statements claiming that strange things had been happening inside the house before the Fox family lived there. And one of those people was Lucretia Pulver. And she had previously lived in the house for 3 months with another family. And she claimed that she had heard what sounded like knocking too. She also heard it. And she said she frequently heard strange knocks coming from beneath the bedroom. And that one night she heard what sounded like a man walking through the house and went down toward the cellar. And she remembered a peddler, a man 30 years old who would come by to the house selling goods. And one of the times where he was coming over, she was unexpectedly sent away. And after that, she never saw him again. And then later, she remembered going down to the cellar and noticing that the ground near the center looked uneven and loose. And shortly after, she saw dirt being carried into the cellar. Suspicious. But she was told that it was to fill rat holes. So now we have people inside the Fox house believing that a man around 31 years old had been murdered and buried near the center of the cellar. Anna Pulver, who frequently visited the previous occupants, remembered the woman of the house telling her that she too would hear strange noises. And she would hear something loud enough that it would wake up her and her husband, and they would secure all the windows. She told her about other occasions where she had heard noises, but they could never figure out where the noises were coming from. They could never explain them. Then you had the Weekman family, who also lived there before the Fox family, and they also reportedly heard noises and knocking and footsteps. One night, their daughter screamed out of nowhere, and everybody woke up to check on her. And according to her mother, the child said something had been moving around her face and head, and she could feel it. And she allegedly said it was cold, and she could feel it all over. Nope, I am packing my bags. On another occasion, Mr. Weekman apparently woke up because he heard someone call his name. He sat up, waited, and then he didn't hear anything else. He didn't see anyone either. He never figured out who called him. This has actually happened to me, where I woke up to a man who called, where I feel like he called my name. It was really creepy. And at the time when I searched for it, some people think it's scientific, other people think it's spiritual. Very interesting stuff. Now, then there was Jane Lape. Jane Leap lived with the Weekman family, and one day she said that she looked into one of the rooms and she saw a man just standing there, just facing her. Like, I would run out the door. She says she saw him very clearly and he didn't speak or move. She went to get Miss Weekman, but by the time they came back, my guy was gone. Like, what on earth is happening in this house? I would have been packed my bags. The people that had lived there before the Fox family said that they too heard stuff. But keep in mind, again, they had lived there before the Fox family. David, the Fox sister's brother, lived about 2 miles away, and when his family called him to tell him what was going on, he came himself to investigate. Everybody was investigating, and he heard the rappings himself. By now, so many people were coming to investigate. They had organized committees stationed in different parts of the house. They were basically like, "Hey demon, it's me, ya boy. If you know, you know." They wanted to make sure that no one in the house was producing the sounds. David also helped dig in the cellar, looking for the supposed body. And again, they hit water and they just couldn't continue. David, who had previously said that he didn't believe in haunted houses, said he couldn't figure out a reasonable human explanation for what he had heard. So now we have the Fox family, the neighbors, and a man who arrived expecting to debunk the whole thing. But 40 years later, one of the girls had a very big secret to share. In October of 1888, Margaret Fox Kane, Maggie, gave a different version of what happened inside the house. She said, "We were very mischievous children and sought merely to terrify our dear mother." According to Maggie, it started as a prank. At night, she and Kate would take an apple. They would tie the apple to a string, and while they were in bed, move the string up and down so that the apple would bump against the floor, or they would just drop it and let it rebound, creating strange noises. Over and over again. Their mother never suspected them. Maggie even said herself that they were so young, their mother didn't think that they were capable of pulling off a trick like that. Remember when Kate was like, "Tomorrow is April Fool's Day and someone is trying to fool us"? Well, there you go. The mother had called the neighbors to investigate, and now the girls had a problem, because there were too many people around to do the apple trick, and it was getting harder to do without getting caught. So they had to adapt. They started rapping on the bed frame. Remember when William sat on the bed talking about he felt the vibration? Well, he could feel it, all right, because Maggie did say that one of the ways they would create the rapping sound was with the bed frame. But, I don't know if that's why he felt the vibration. Now, as more people came, the girls had to get better. They had to improve. Maggie said the attention encouraged them and hyped them up. It was fun. Neighbors wanted answers and they gave them the answers. The community eventually identified a man named Bell who had previously lived in the house, and people began believing that he had committed the murder. But in her 1888 confession, Maggie called him the poor innocent man because she said that Bell was shunned and looked upon in the community as a murderer. So what started as two children trying to scare their mom had now resulted in an innocent man being treated like a murderer. The girl's oldest sister, Leah, lived in Rochester, and eventually Maggie and Kate went to live with her for a while. And according to Maggie, this is where they discovered a better way to make the rapping sounds. Kate discovered that she could produce certain sounds using her knuckles and joints. And then they discovered they could make similar sounds with their feet. Maggie said they practiced until they could make the sounds. And first they did one foot, then they learned with both. She claimed they developed control over their muscles and tendons below their knee. I think that's so impressive. That's crazy. They practiced until it was easy to do. Practice makes perfect, or so they say. According to Maggie, Leah began holding exhibitions in Rochester, and crowds came to see the girls, and Maggie claimed that Leah was making anywhere between 100 to 150 a night. People would ask questions and the girls would answer with raps. Maggie said that Leah would give them signals during the exhibitions to let them know when to make the noises. And according to Maggie, Leah knew that the girls were obviously tricking people, but she also claimed that she genuinely believed in spirits, and Leah tried to convince them that the spirits really did exist, and told them that when they were little girls, they came to visit her in her room and told them that the girls, her sisters, would do special things one day. They were destined for great things. The girls traveled from Rochester to New York and then around the US, and people crowded into rooms to hear the rappings. And Maggie remembers this one stop in Cincinnati where she said rooms were packed from morning until night. And looking back, she said that she and Kate had been led around like lambs. They were children, and in her words, they should have been out at play in fresh air. Instead, they were called upon to perform over and over again. One lady said that she could feel a spirit tapping on her shoulder. And then years later, Maggie was basically like, that's pure imagination because I never touched her shoulder. They still kept going after that until people started getting skeptical, mainly because of a better understanding of science. Eventually, Maggie married Dr. Kane, and according to her, he didn't want her talking about her old life, so she stopped for a while. And then, unfortunately, he died, and Maggie was poor and had financial pressure, and she started again. Maggie sounded angry at spiritualism, angry at her sister Leah, angry at herself. And she actually blamed her sister Leah for much of the misfortune of her life, which is really sad. And she said that she asked Leah many times, now that you are rich, why don't you save your soul? By 1888, she said she was poor and ill, and she decided that she was going to finally expose it. She called it a sacred duty, a holy mission. She wanted, in her words, to give spiritualism a death blow. She told her truth and even showed them how the wrappings were done. But there's a plot twist because Maggie later took back her confession, claiming that what she said about spiritualism wasn't true. Do with that information what you will, because her confession never explained why people claim to have heard noises before the Fox family ever even lived there. Thank you for watching, my lovely friends. I am Glory from Archives of the Century. Stay safe, stay weird, stay curious. I'll see you in the archives, my historian friends.